December 30th, 1724. No trade yet, but our traders came on board today and informed us the people had burnt 4 towns of their enemies, so that tomorrow we expect slaves. Liverpool Surgeon.
Received on this cargo 46 men, 34 women, 14 boys, 6 girls, and 147 chests of corn. The rest of the goods delivered onshore to Cape Coast and Accra to Mr. Harbin. William Dexter, ship's captain.
Ship captains were cautioned not to buy all their slaves from one place. Africans who knew each other, who spoke the same language, were more likely to conspire and rebel.
There would be maybe 25 seamen and the ship's officers. There might have been a crew of 30. And these 30 had to control maybe 300 men, black men and women, who were aware of being abducted and who were desperate and who were dangerous because they were obviously waiting to seize any opportunity that was offered to rebel and to take over the ship and to kill the crew, and that did happen fairly frequently. The only way that this could be contained was by a system of fear.
I was now persuaded that I had got into a world of bad spirits, and that they were going to kill me. Their complexions, too, differing so much from ours. Their long hair. And the language they spoke, which was very different from any I had ever heard, united to confirm me in this belief. I no longer doubted my fate. I asked if we were going to be eaten by those white men with horrible looks, red faces, and long hair. O lauda equiano.
Captains call the voyage from West Africa to the New World the Middle Passage, the middle leg of a triangular course that began and ended in Europe. From English ports, ships sailed to Africa to trade goods for slaves. Then the human cargo was taken to the Americas and traded for raw materials, which were then carried back to England and sold. The crossing from Africa to the Americas usually took 60 to 90 days, but some voyages took as long as 4 or even 6 months. Bad weather and sickness could turn any trip into a nightmare.
The cramped quarters of ships being packed in such a way that a slave will be between the legs of another slave and having to lie in the feces. The lack of air, the longer this trip takes, the more suffocating.
The surgeon, upon going between decks in the morning to examine the situation of the slaves, frequently finds several dead, and sometimes a dead and living Negro fastened by their irons together. When this is the case, they are brought upon the deck. The living Negro is disengaged and the dead one thrown overboard. Alexander Falconbridge, ship's surgeon.
There are no doubt people who went mad. Inability to communicate, decisions having to be made, and this person is suffering as yourself. Does one help? Does one simply try to make it the best that one can alone, not knowing where am I being taken? What is my fate? For weeks, months, depending what the point of origin was.
One day, two of my wearied countrymen who were chained together somehow made it through the nettings and jumped into the sea. Immediately, another quite dejected fellow also followed their example, and I believe many more would have very soon done the same if they had not been prevented by the ship's crew, who were instantly alarmed. Olaudah Equiano.
The idea, I think, was that the slave cannot be allowed to die by his own will and intention. He cannot be allowed to die voluntarily. If he's going to die, it must be at the hands of his captors, so that in that case he doesn't spread a dangerous example.
Monday, 11th December. By the favor of divine providence, made a timely discovery today that the slaves were forming a plot for insurrection. Surprised two of them attempting to get off their irons, and in their rooms found knives, stones, shot, etc., and a cold chisel. There appeared 8 principally concerned in protecting the mischief, and 4 boys in supplying them with the above instruments. Put the boys in irons and slightly in the thumbscrews to urge them to a full confession. Captain John Newton.
We stood in arms, firing on the revolted slaves, of whom we killed some and wounded many. And many of the most mutinous leapt overboard and drowned themselves in the ocean with much resolution. James Barbow, English sailor, 1701.
Often did I think many of the inhabitants of the deep much happier than myself. Every circumstance I met with served only to render my state more painful and heighten my apprehensions and my opinion of the cruelty of whites. Olaudah Equiano.
The slavers, they knew at one level that these were human beings, because they were obviously clearly human beings. At the same time, they were objects of profit. And those two concepts couldn't obviously be really reconciled, and they never were reconciled. It was just, I think, that the humane, the sense of the humanity of these people was simply suppressed for the sake of gold. And the shocking thing is that human beings are able indefinitely to suppress the urgings of their common humanity and to deny it for the sake of making profits.
Is not the slave trade entirely a war with the heart of man? And surely that which is begun by breaking down the barriers of virtue involves in its continuance destruction to every principle and buries all sentiment in ruin. Olaudah Equiano.
The Middle Passage ended for Equiano on the island of Barbados, one of the most profitable colonies in the British Empire.